Instead of persecuting the church, do you know this? The Apostle Paul wrote most of the books of the New Testament that we have. At the end of his life in 2 Corinthians, he talked about all the things that he's endured for the gospel of Jesus Christ. He talks about how he's almost been killed several times, how he's been stoned, how he's been whipped, how he's been shipwrecked. He traded a lame story for something so much better. He stopped living the lame story and he traded it in for something incredible. And when he died, let me tell you this much, he's gone down in history as being an amazing follower of Christ. When he died, what died with him wasn't just his dreams. Get this, he lived such an amazing story that his dreams didn't die, but they were carried on even today. Even right here, right now, 2,000 years later, we're still talking about the faith of the Apostle Paul. Now that's an incredible story. At any time the lead character's desire changes, their story can change too. Can I tell you, I've experienced this in firsthand in my life. And I want to share with you a story tonight, just a little bit about me. See, I grew up in a home where my mom went to church, but my dad didn't. And I grew up in a home where a lot of the time my dad, he was one of those guys who was a big dude. In fact, my dad and my mom are here tonight, but my dad stands about 6'5" tall. In his prime, he was about 240 pounds of muscle. My dad was a big dude. And my dad was a police officer in the hometown where we grew up. And seriously, you know how you used to get in those conversations with your friends at school and they're like, hey, my dad can beat up your dad. I'm like, no, my dad can beat your dad up, punch him in the face, spray him with mace, beat him with a nightstick, and then throw him in the back of a police car. Now what's up? All right? That's my dad. And so my dad growing up, he didn't go to church with us very often. And although my dad had a good heart and good intentions and good desire, my dad was an angry guy on the inside. There were lots of things that he experienced in his life that had caused him to be pretty bitter. And for my house growing up, there were lots of times where my dad and my mom didn't get along. And where I experienced my parents arguing and fighting with each other on a regular basis. And not all the times, but it wasn't unusual for me to wake up in the mornings whenever it was time to go to school and to hear my parents arguing with one another. And my dad, although my dad would try his very best to be as considerate as he could be, there was still a huge giant hole that was in my dad's heart. And whenever I was 15 years old, my dad and I didn't see things eye to eye the way that we always had. And there were some big differences that were going on at that time. And my dad and I got in one of the biggest fights that I think we'd ever been in. And my dad asked me, he said, Robert, I want you to tell me one thing that you want from me. And in return, I'm going to ask you one thing that I want from you. I said, okay. He said what he wanted from me was he wanted me to behave better. He wanted me to respect him and to respect my mom more. And I said, I could try to do that. He says, what do you want from me? I said, Dad, I want you to start to come to church with me and my mom and my sister. So I tried to work on my end of the deal, and my dad started to work on his end of the deal, and about once a month he would come to church with us. But then once a month started to lead to like once every other week. And once every other week started to lead to like twice a week. And twice a week led to my dad having a huge interest in what was going on and what was taking place. And one day my dad came home. I was 16 years old. I don't ever remember up to that point ever seeing my dad cry in my life. And my dad came home and he was on his lunch break and he was in his police uniform. 6'4" tall, walks through the door. And I saw this look on my dad's face that wasn't very familiar to me. And it looked like my dad was about to cry and fighting back tears that were in his eyes. And he looked at me and he said, Robert, I want to tell you something. And as he grabbed me and he gave me a giant hug, he said, Robert, I want to tell you today, I went to the pastor's office and I couldn't fight it anymore. And I accepted Jesus Christ in my heart as my personal Savior. But I want to tell you about my dad's story, because at any time that the lead character's desire changed, then their story can change too. And my dad had done a lot of things in his life that hurt our family. I didn't know it at the time, but found out later that for the majority of my parents' marriage, my dad had cheated on my mom. And this was something that came out and it was so entirely hard for our family to deal with. But what's incredible is this, is that God had changed my dad's heart. And God had made him into a new man. And his desires were completely different. And his desires changed from being unfaithful and from being hateful and from having anger. And his story changed into trying to be one where he was fixing his relationship with me and fixing his relationship with my sister and fixing his relationship with my mother. His story was no longer lame. What my dad woke up to was the fact that he was just a role player in a bigger picture, in a bigger story, and that God had an amazing story that he wanted him to live. And my dad traded his lame story for an amazing story. You want to talk about a great story? He started to restore his marriage with my mother. My mom is one of the greatest women that I know. I look up to her with all of my heart. And my mom forgave my dad, and she said, if God can forgive you, then I can forgive you. And their story became about restoring their marriage. It's actually kind of gross now if you see my parents, because they actually like each other. They hold hands, they kiss each other. I never even knew my parents liked each other. I mean, they love each other now. It's all over the place. And it's crazy because my dad's story had changed. And his story became about restoring his relationship with me, restoring his relationship with my sister. You know, I remember one of the times shortly after my dad had been saved, I woke up in the morning to a pretty hideous noise, and I thought that my parents were arguing again. I thought, oh no. Not again. But please, not again. As I woke up in the morning and I started to get my attention and I started to focus, I started to listen to what was going on. My dad was in the shower singing a hymn at the top of his lungs. It wasn't the prettiest thing you'd ever heard, but it was a different thing. Let me tell you this, my dad's been saved for a little over 10 years now, and one thing that I would never believe that somebody would have told me 10 years ago, but let me tell you about my dad. He just retired from the police force a couple of years ago, and my dad is now a pastor. If somebody would have told me 10 years ago that my dad was going to be a pastor, I would have laughed at you. And I want to tell you this. I remember one of the things that my dad told me shortly after he accepted Christ. And he said, Robert, one of the reasons that I came to a relationship with Jesus is because I watched you, and I watched your mother, and I watched your sister, and you had something that I didn't have. I want to tell you something tonight, student. Your story is influencing everyone who's around you. People are watching you. People see your story. Why would we dare settle for something lame? Some of you go back to homes where your mom or your dad don't know about Jesus. Listen to me tonight. Your story can influence them. There are people in your community who don't know about Jesus. And when you dream big dreams, when you refuse to settle for the small things, and you live out boldly your relationship with Christ, it will influence the people around you. I want you to hear me tonight. This entire summer, I've dealt with students who have come and they've shared with me some pretty sad stories. We've had girls who've come to camp who said, Robert, when I go back home, I know that I'm going to be living with my mom who's a crackhead and my dad who's a drunk. I know when I go back home, Robert, that my mom's not going to be around because she stays out all night long working at the strip club. I know, Robert, when I go back home that I'm going to have to deal with an uncle who molests me. Robert, I know when I go back home that there are all kinds of bad situations that are waiting for me. And I know some of you are sitting here tonight and you're going, Robert, I've got so many things that are up against me. I've got so many situations that you wouldn't even begin to imagine. I want you to look me in the eye and I want you to get this tonight. Your family's past does not have to determine your future.
Amen.
I want you to get this tonight. Just because somebody has hurt you in the past, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry if somebody has broke your heart, but I'm telling you, you need to forgive them because you don't need to let them have any more power over you. Just because you're afraid of dreaming big dreams, you need to leave those fears at the door tonight, and you need to dare to dream amazing things for Christ. Why settle for a lame story? If you were to walk out of here tonight and get hit by a bus, what dreams would die with you? If the only dreams that would die are the pursuit of an athletic career or a relationship, then I would dare to say tonight that maybe your story is pretty lame. That maybe you've allowed the fear of acceptance or the fear of what people might think or the fear of actually achieving big things hold you back from serving Jesus wholeheartedly and living a story that would absolutely, positively rock this world for Jesus Christ. If you still have your Bibles with you,